certainly a pleasure to see all of you this evening. Glad to be back. Enjoyed the meeting at Harpersville. Some good brethren there, and we had some visitors from the community, I think at about every service. I know we did Sunday night, Monday night, and last night. Some not Christians, and that was encouraging. And some from various places, and some from here. And so we appreciate that and enjoyed the time with the folks there, but glad to be back here too. Real quickly, Lee's situation is about the same, no real change. Brother Richard fell, was it this morning, or it was this morning, and he was coming up his deck in the back and fell evidently on the last step going onto the deck, and he told me that he kind of hit his face, maybe braced himself with his arm and bruised it. Did he cut it very badly, Sister Eleanor? Just skin, yeah. So, yeah. So he's not feeling the best, and I'm sure there are others who are not with us, but because of different problems. But we're glad to be together. Our study, since we have the first Wednesday night in the month, we have our class first and our lesson later, and wanted to go briefly through our daily Bible readings. We have come, let's see, Sunday was the second, that's number 92, 1 Samuel 21, and then we go all the way down to the 5th of April, which is number 95. So really, 1 Samuel 21 through 2 Samuel 3. I'm going to try to go through fairly quickly. 1 Samuel, we have the transition book between the judges and the kings. And we find the first 7 chapters, Eli and the last judge, Samuel. The people say, give us a king. And so in chapter 8, who is appointed or anointed? Saul. And so in 8 through 15, we have really the kingship of Saul. And then in 16 through the end of the book, we have the descendancy of Saul and the ascendancy of David. There in those chapters, there is one chapter that all the little fellas know, and it really is a catalyst. It catapults, as it were, David into the limelight. What is the event of which we speak? Yeah, David and Goliath, and that's in chapter 17. In those last chapters, let me find my place here. In chapters 21 through 28, David's continual ascendancy, but it's in exile. He's running from whom? Saul. That's right. And we don't have really time to explore any of this, but how could I phrase this? A part of what book is written during a lot of this time? Psalms. That's right. A number of David's Psalms are written during the time that he's in exile, and we can read 1 Samuel and we can get a glimpse of what's going on, but we get the heart of David when we actually read the Psalms that were written during this period. Toward the end, Saul is so demented and becomes so depraved with bitterness and jealousy over David that he even consults a medium. That's right. Earlier in his reign, he had run all those people out. True or false? Yeah, it's true. And now he even consults one, and Samuel even comes up. In 29 and 30, David escapes from a dilemma with Saul, and then in chapter 30, David defeats the Amalekites. But in 31, what nation or group of people come and really are responsible for Saul's death as well as his son Jonathan? The Philistines, that's right. Now, in 2 Samuel, we have so Saul dies, and who is poised to take over? David. And so in 2 Samuel, really the whole book is about David. In the first, if you might remember, when we studied it, we kind of left the alliteration, David's triumphs in 1 through 10, and then his transgression in 11. I just say that and you're thinking immediately, who? Bathsheba. And then his troubles in 12 through the end. And so you've got his triumphs, his transgression, and his troubles that follow. Let's just look at those first 3 chapters. In chapters 1 through 4, his reign in Hebron, which lasted how long? 7 years and 6 months, right? The other time he reigned was in the city of, not Hebron, but Jerusalem. All right, in chapter 1, there's a fellow who is among the Amalekites, and he comes and he pretends, he feigns that he has done what? Killed Jonathan as well as Saul, thinking evidently that David would be what? Overjoyed. And David said, how in the world did you do that to the Lord's anointed? And so what's David have done to him? He has him killed. And then we have this song in the latter part of chapter 1. And then several things in chapter 2 happen. David becomes king in Hebron, that's mentioned. He gets a couple of his wives back. Verse 2, Ahinoam and Abigail. Abigail had been married to that fellow by the name of, yes, and what kind of a fellow was he? Churlish, yeah, brutish. And so we have David becomes king. Then Ishbosheth is in Mahanaim, and it ends up Abner kills Asahel. And then in chapter 3, David does what? Well, he's noted as king. You notice there in verse 1, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. And we have some of the sons, some of the wives, and their phone numbers and addresses just about given there, where they were from. And then who revolts? Who revolts during that chapter? Abner. And Abner had come to David and goes away from David, and then this man who really is an opportunistic, he's loyal to David though, but he didn't have the spirit of David. He ends up doing what to Abner? Kills him. And of whom do we speak? Joab. And Joab kills Abner, which, Abner was conspiratorial in his dealings. But so that's the end of chapter 3. David continues king as we go in chapter 4 and 5 and following. And we have a series of military military triumphs that are mentioned here. And they go all the way up to the time where he just stays back home for a little while, and while the men are out fighting, and then Bathsheba shows up, and then it's downhill from that. All right, let's hope this is helpful to keep our minds going in the Old Testament while we're now in the New. Let's go back to where we are in our study of the life of Jesus. We want to remember the big picture. We have the years of what? Preparation, about 30. And then the beginning ministry begins with what event? Jesus' baptism. Then his temptation. And then you would think that most of the events during that time, probably 3 to 6 months, occurred, you tell me, Judea, Samaria, or Galilee? Judea. Good. They're all around Jerusalem. Chapter 1, the events surrounding John the Baptist, and then John the Baptist pointing to Jesus and pointing his disciples to Jesus. Chapter 2, they go to Canaan, go to Capernaum, then back to Jerusalem. 3, we're in Jerusalem, interview with Nicodemus. Chapter 4, he's going north, and we have the interview with this woman at the well. Then to Cana, where he heals a nobleman's son. He goes to Nazareth, where he's rejected. They try to kill him. And then he makes Capernaum his home starts at Home Depot, his home quarters. There was It was kind of a precursor to Home Depot when we were in Richmond, Virginia. It was home
HQ, home quarters.
Home quarters, yeah.
We have them here.
So if I say home quarters, and I'm thinking Richmond, Virginia, well, trying to think Capernaum, you know. Anyway, so he makes Capernaum his headquarters, I should say that. And we have all those events that happen around that time. He calls Peter, Andrew, James, and John. They're right here around Capernaum. Says, you come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And then a lot of healings on the Sabbath around Capernaum. And then we have the Sermon on the Mount right outside Capernaum. And then these stories in Matthew and Luke that we've been discussing. The centurion's servant, what was significant about that was he said, I've not seen so great faith, no, not in Israel. And then he raised the widow's son at Nain. And then the estimate of John sent people, a couple of disciples, are you the one or look we for another? Then woes on the cities of Galilee. And remember, woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. For if the works done in Tyre and Sidon been done if the works that were done in you were done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented. And Capernaum, do you think you'll be exalted into heaven? I say you'll be cast down into hell. For he said, if the works done in you were done way down here in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. And so the woes, and then he attends a feast by Simon. That's in Luke, the 7th chapter. The sinful woman anoints his feet. Then the second tour of Galilee is mentioned in the first 3 verses of Luke 8. And then this busy day in Jesus' life. He's accused of casting out demons. And that leads to his discussion by saying, every idle word men say, the same shall be what? You'll give an account in judgment. And then the scribe was, we're not all as bad as you think. Make us look. You just show us a sign. And he said, there's not going to be given. Evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. No sign shall be given except the sign of Jonah the prophet. And that was spoke of what event in the life of Jesus? His resurrection. And then his mother and brethren desire, and then his parables. And that's where we are in the parable. All right, let's go down real quickly. The sower basically represents the hearts of those who do what? Who hear the word. And there are 4 kinds. Do I have it on? No, good. You've got the wayside, stony, thorny, and good. You know, all those. One kind of ground represents people who never become Christians. Wayside. And 2 of them represent people who become Christians and then evidently fall away or they're unfaithful. That's the wayside and rocky. And then only the good are those who are honest and good hearts. And then the next parable that's only recorded in Mark is the seed growing by itself, which really shows, as I tried to picture it in the air here, you have the different kinds of soils and the good soil, and those are Christians. Well, then you come over here. Well, here's how it works. The seed germinates in their hearts, and you don't oftentimes see any effect of it, and then all of a sudden it's ripe for harvest. The power of the word working in the individual. But then, even those people who are Christians and have heard the word and they're producing good and it's working in their lives, they've got a lot of what to overcome? A lot of obstacles. And so we have the parable of the tares, obstacles faced. And that's where we were when last time we were together. The sower of the good seed is Jesus now. The sower of the bad. And whereas in the parable of the sower, the seed, it represents the word. In this, the seed, the good seed, represents sons of the kingdom or Christians. The field is the world, the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are angels. And I'm not going to go through all these notes. I do want to add one to it that I didn't have last Wednesday night. And that is this, that the parable of the tares really disproves premillennialism. Because premillennialism has the wicked and the righteous raised at different times, 1,000 years apart. Whereas in the parable of the tares, when the wicked and the righteous grow together, and then what happens? They're separated at the end of time. There's the division made there. So any theory that promotes the idea of a separation of 1,000 years between the resurrection of the wicked and the righteous is disproved, as well as plain statements. Jesus said in John 5, marvel not at this, the hour cometh now is when all that are in the tomb shall hear his voice and shall come forth. They that have done evil unto the resurrection of judgment, they that have done good to the resurrection of life. One resurrection of all people, but they're going to what? Different places. One resurrection. Okay. All right. So now we're down to the mustard seed. And if you've got your page to the 69 on our little workbooks, the parable of the mustard seed. Let's read these passages. We've got two mentioned. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. David, if you would, read for us. I start with David and Patty oftentimes because their voices, from where they are, everybody can hear them. Sometimes from the front, if it's, I don't always explain that, but there's a method to my madness. All right, David, Matthew 13, 31 and 32.
Another parable he put forth to them, say, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches.
All right. All right. Let's answer our questions. How would the kingdom begin? Very small. Yeah, very small. And what would it then do? Grow? Yes, grow to be how big?
Like a large tree.
Yes, like a large tree, large enough for birds to come in and yes, it could come and lodge in it. Got several things that I don't have. A lot of points here that I want to make. Mustard seed. It's not the smallest known, but it's usually considered the smallest among the herbs that were sown in Jewish fields and gardens, as well as greatest among the herbs grown by the Jews. It was smaller than wheat, rye, barley, others, and grew quickly into a large herbal shrub under favorable conditions. International Standard Bible Encyclopedia says anywhere from 10 to 12 feet. And Jesus used the herb, the mustard seed, as an illustration of later teaching. On one occasion, he said, if your faith were as great as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, remove yonder hence, and it would move. And I've got a picture, and I didn't incorporate it here. When we were over in Israel, we were up in the area of the Dan National Forest. That's got a lot of national parks are over there, kind of like what we have. And there were a lot of mustard bushes, and some of the seeds were around. And my friend Al Burns put his hand down in a little cluster of the seeds, and I took a picture with it. I'll try to bring that Sunday. And you could get an idea, a perspective of how small it was, relative to your own hand. But it was small, but it grows great. And Dang, I wanted to make a point. Jesus says, hey, the kingdom of heaven will start small, it's going to grow to be large. And we might think, whoop-de-doo, big deal. It is a big deal. If we think back, let's go back to Daniel, the 2nd chapter. There are statements made prophetically that tie exactly into what Jesus is talking about. In Daniel 2, Daniel is in Babylon, you remember. Nebuchadnezzar is king. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And then he forgets the dream. And he asks some of his satraps if they could tell him what he had dreamed and give the interpretation. And what did they say? Be glad to? No, couldn't do it. But they knew about Daniel, so they called Daniel in, and Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar, reminded him of what he had dreamed, and then gave the interpretation. I want us to start in verse 31. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This image, which was mighty and whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the aspect thereof was terrible. As for this image, its head was of fine gold, breast and arms of silver, belly, thighs of brass, legs of iron, feet of iron, and part of clay. In our study, what did those represent? What was the head of fine gold? That represented Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. The breast and arms of silver, that would be a kingdom that would follow. That was a Medo-Persian. And breast and arms is belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron. That would what followed the Medo-Persian. The Greeks, and then his legs have, the feet have part of iron and part of clay. That would be the Romans. And we see that developed, even part of that developed in the book of Daniel. All right, keep reading in verse 34. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, a stone which smote the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay. The stone smote the image of that was iron and clay. Well, that was representative of the Roman Empire. And break them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, silver, gold broken in pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that no place was found. And the stone, that was the stone that was cut out without hands, the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That stone that was cut out of the mountain and filled and grew and filled the whole earth is representative of what? The kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on down in verse 44. And in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall the sovereignty, that's its autonomy, its self-governing, its independence, neither shall the sovereignty thereof be left to another people. In other words, the kingdom of heaven is such it's never going to be taken over. Well, what happened to the Babylonians? They were taken, their sovereignty was left to the Medo-Persians. The Medo-Persians' sovereignty was left to the Grecians. The Grecians were left to Rome, basically. And Rome, their sovereignty was left to the Goths. And you just go on down through history that the rise and fall of nations, that there'll be a powerhouse of a nation, and then all of a sudden it will either implode or explode or be taken over by others. And its sovereignty, its self-governing ability, its autonomy, its rule will be left to another people. But not so with what? The kingdom of heaven. And so that's the point. Now, here's what I've got up here. Daniel had prophesied that the kingdom would begin a small stone cut out without hands and would smite the image upon its feet that were of iron and clay and break them in pieces, which was a prophecy that the kingdom of God would begin during the days of Rome, but would overtake, outlast it, and become a great mountain and fill all the earth. Therefore, 600 years before Jesus came into the world, Daniel prophesied that not only would the kingdom of heaven begin during the days of the Roman Empire, but that it would also begin small, but grow to the point of filling the earth. Can you believe the prophecy? The minutiae of that prophecy. And Jesus' statement in the parable reflects the same idea. And then sacred history, that's the book of Acts, as well as profane history, corroborate on. Yes, the Bible is inspired. We have confidence in that. And so Jesus' little statement about the mustard seed starting small and then growing to be great coincides with Daniel's prophecy, and it, of course, is just a prediction of how the gospel would spread and go from there. The kingdom began from those mentioned in Acts 1, about 120, which included the apostles, some of the women. It grew quickly. Everybody can quote Acts 2:41. Those who gladly received his word were baptized, and were added to them that day about 3,000 souls. But then in Acts, the 4th chapter, in verse 4, the number of men came to be about 5,000. And then summary statements indicate that multitudes were added to the believers there in Acts 5:14. A great company of the priests were obedient to the faith in Acts 6 verse 7. And then the church in Judea and Samaria had peace. That was right after the conversion of whom? Acts 9. Who's thinking with me? Saul of Tarsus, that's right. And then you can quote Acts 11:26, I'm sure. Barnabas went to Tarsus to seek for Saul and brought him back to Antioch. And there they gathered themselves with the church and taught much people. And the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. They taught much people. Those are summary statements that they're just adding leaps and bounds. So anyway, approximately 30 years after the kingdom of heaven began, Paul stated the gospel had been heard throughout the then known world. Passage in Colossians 1, Paul said, if so be that you've continued in the faith, grounded and steadfast, not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which was preached to every creature under heaven, whereof I, Paul, have made a minister. By the time of AD 63, the gospel had gone to the then known world. Didn't mean everybody obeyed it, but they heard about it. And Acts 19 verse 10, when Paul was at Ephesus, Luke recorded all Asia heard the word. So the gospel just radiated from Jerusalem and Samaria, roundabout, then with Paul's efforts in the Mediterranean world. So such, it continues to grow today and will until the Lord returns. Such should give us great confidence in Jesus Christ, in the authenticity of the Bible, and all of this from one parable that's in 2 verses of our book of Matthew. One parable, 2 verses. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, and it grows, and you can't make it up. While not the main point of the parable, growth in a person's understanding, growth in his spirituality of individuals, certainly making up the kingdom, can and should occur. I don't think that's that point there, but that you could turn it into that. All right. Comment or question on any of this? Anybody? All right. We've got time for maybe one more. E, the parable of leaven here. And I've got Matthew 13:33. A.D. Robertson and some others put Mark 4:33 and 34 where he just kind of summarized it. But let's just go back to Matthew and read that one verse. Paula, if you would. Matthew 13, verse 33.
Another parable spake against them. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened.
All right, good. All right, let's answer a question first. What does leaven do in meal? It makes it rise. What was that, Kay? It expands. There you go. It expands, and through that expansion, it rises, and it works by contact, we might say. What's the spiritual application? The leaven, the parable of the leaven, insofar as the kingdom is concerned, is that the kingdom will spread by contact. Yeah, personal contact. And mentioned in the lesson under this, the kingdom would grow by slowly permeating society. This would come by contact and through good influences, not flashy methods that impress people. I had a couple of things in addition. A quote, there's a long quote here, we'll go through it pretty quickly, from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. The editor there said, the form of leaven used in bread making and the method of using it were simple and definite. The leaven consisted always, so far as the evidence goes, of a piece of fermented dough kept over from a former baking. A lump of dough thus preserved was either dissolved in water in the kneading trough before the flour was added, or was hid in the flour, the King James says meal, and kneaded along with it, as was the case mentioned in the parable. The bread thus made was known as leavened, and as distinguished from unleavened bread in Exodus, the 12th chapter. The main point is that leaven works by contact and from within. It often describes the working within one's heart, either for good or bad. Hence the leaven of righteousness, as here with the prefiguring really the kingdom, or the leaven of unrighteousness. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which Jesus said is hypocrisy. And that's used in these passages. And quite frankly, leaven is used more often for what? Bad or good? Bad, yes. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. And that's stated Galatians, 1 Corinthians 5, in a bad way. The fornicating brother that they had harbored, they didn't do anything about it. That's where Paul made that statement. That kind of influence is deleterious to the whole group, and don't let that happen. And the latter use is figuratively used for mental and spiritual corruption with a tendency to infect others as it permeates or corrupts those it contacts. The gospel, how it's used here now in Matthew 13, the gospel should permeate our hearts, then our behavior and our lifestyle should influence others, whether they be our own families, those closest to us, those at work, and school environment, and everywhere. So let's see what we can remember here real quickly, and then we'll stop. We got the first parable is the parable of the sower, how people hear. Then it goes down to the good ground. Well, the good ground, and then how does it work in honest and good heart? Well, that's the parable of the seed growing of itself. Well, and then we move along, and then we have the next one is these people who are Christians are going to face obstacles, parable of the tares. And then after that, we've got the parable to show, okay, now as these people obey the gospel and they're overcoming difficulties, this movement, this kingdom, this relationship with God is actually going to grow from very small to large. Parable of the mustard seed. And the way it happens is by contact. Parable of the leaven. As you see kind of a flow to Jesus' parables here. Let's stop because of what we have to do here in just a moment. Next we'll have the teaching in parables was prophesied, and then the treasure hidden in a field and a man seeking a goodly pearl. They both teach basically the same thing. It's just how you come about it. I love to study the life of Jesus. If you didn't know that, it thrills my soul really to talk about him, and I want to be more like him, and I know you do too. And when we study what his words say, and we study about how he reacted to people, what he did, we come to know him. I was talking to my wife about this idea yesterday. When we're younger, I know when I was younger, I don't think I could have grasped some of the ideas that we're trying to talk about now. I just, what did Jesus tell us to do? What did Jesus tell us not to do? Well, that's all a part of it, but there's a whole lot more that we're seeing that is able to really deepen our understanding of who he is and why we should love him and want to follow him with all our hearts. Any comment or question? Anybody? Okay.